Hello, I'm Nate, aka B-Tier Mutineer. I usually make videos about RPGs and other games I enjoy, but I have to make an exception this time to talk about a game I dislike, because I think it's really important to share my opinion as someone who has loved Dragon Age for a long time. We need to talk about Dragon Age the Veilguard. There is a lot of conflicting information out there about this game, with some people wanting to hate it for political reasons, other people wanting to love it for the same reasons, and neither camp really looking at the game as a game and simply analyzing its quality from a more objective perspective. I myself am a progressive person, if you want to call me anything, seeing as I'm trans and queer as well as ADHD. However, while these are all elements of my identity, I identify as a person above all and have many different aspects that are part of me. Thus, I don't feel the need to identify solely with my gender or sexuality. And as someone who is far more open about these things, I promise we'll talk about Veilguard's supposed representation and its issues later. Even though these two highly politicized camps of gamers exist, there are people outside of this manufactured us versus them conflict who did review the game simply based on its own merits, combined with their own gaming preferences, of course. I specifically want to highlight Mr. Matty Plays, Mortismal Gaming, and SkillUp. You'll see that Mr. Matty and SkillUp have negative reviews of Veilguard, while Mortismal's review was positive. I think all three reviews are perfectly valid, and I urge you to watch these three at least, if not more reviews, before you decide what your opinion of the game is. That is, of course, if you're on the fence about it and aren't sure whether to buy it or try it for yourself. If you are going to play it, you'll of course experience it and be able to decide how you feel then. I want you to understand that it is absolutely fine for some people to love this game and others to hate it. No piece of media is meant to be for everybody, and just because someone likes it doesn't mean it's objectively good, and similarly, if someone dislikes it, it doesn't automatically mean it's objectively bad. You don't have to justify your liking or disliking of something by implying that it is morally right or wrong to like or dislike it. Personal preferences have nothing to do with morality. With these caveats in mind, I want to discuss my issues with Veilguard as someone who has been playing Dragon Age Origins every single year since 2010. DAO is my all-time favorite game, and is always the first game I install on my computer whenever I get a new one. I have thousands of hours in Origins, a few hundred hours in DA2, and over 700 hours in Inquisition too. I enjoyed all three games in the Dragon Age trilogy, and even if Origins is my favorite, I still have many aspects I loved about Dragon Age 2 and Inquisition. I have never thought any of these games were bad, but I'm sorry to say that to me, Veilguard is bad, and it's so far removed from the Dragon Age trilogy that I can't even see it as a Dragon Age game. What do I dislike so much about it? Let's start with something very surface level and easy to see. The visuals. I don't like the weirdly cartoon-like stylization of the characters, and if I could have maybe gotten used to that in time, I can't take any of the monsters seriously. They look like the most generic mobile game enemies. The Darkspawn and Demon redesigns are baffling since they had some unique designs for them, especially in Inquisition, and for some reason they decided to throw all of that out of the window. I don't even know what to say about the Qunari redesign. The weirdly smooth and large foreheads, the facial structure that just makes them look like basic humans with horns rather than an actually different race. And this is actually done to the elves too. In an attempt to be more inclusive with their characters, BioWare ended up making every race look essentially the same other than a few characteristics such as dwarves being short, elves having pointy ears, and Qunari being tall and having horns. The thing is, it was part of Dragon Age lore that people of various Southeast Asian descents were not part of Thedas, but were instead theorized to exist on the undiscovered far continent to the east of Thedas. If the devs wanted to bring Southeast Asian elves, all they had to do was explain how those elves traveled from that continent to Thedas, like say, by using alluvions. The whole Veiljumper faction could have been originally from that other continent, instead of being Dalish elves and other random people from Thedas. And I think it could have been extremely interesting to have this new faction coming from outside of Thedas that very quickly becomes relevant and powerful due to them having superior knowledge of ancient elven artifacts and other such things. Moving on, some of the companion designs confuse me. How did they get approved? Tosh looks really weird and, I don't know, kind of unremarkable or forgettable on top of wearing what is possibly the worst outfit I have ever seen. It's because they redesigned the Qunari and decided to also make their armor and clothing look awful. And keep in mind that this is our first non-male Qunari companion, so it's really weird Tosh is just kind of meh. Emmerich looks like a Disney villain together with his comedic relief sidekick, Skeleton, that is for some reason voiced by Matthew Mercer, even though all he does is make weird noises. Davrin looks boring, and also very confusing that he's an elf since other than the ears, he has no elvish features. He genuinely just looks like a black human man cosplaying an elf. In fact, every single character in the game that I've seen in gameplay and cutscene footage so far looks like someone from our current society cosplaying badly as a character from a generic fantasy setting. The UI looks really weird, and I agree with other people who have said it looks like UI you would see in an MMO or mobile game. There are so many glowy effects everywhere, that purple color is really grating on the eyes, and in general the UI design doesn't suggest Dragon Age. Now I'll be honest with you, the UI of Inquisition was very modern looking and didn't really scream Dragon Age at me either, but at least the way it was presented was in a Dragon Age style enough that it was serviceable. If you're interested in a far more in-depth explanation on just what is wrong with Veilguard's UI, I highly recommend Lorgworks' video in which he improves the UI. Personally, I would have scrapped it entirely and made it completely different, but his improvements make the UI look a lot less nausea-inducing. I think the environment looks great, but its style clashes with that of the characters and creatures, so while it looks good on its own, in combination it unfortunately sends mixed messages. The overall art direction simply lacks vision and cohesion. I know this game switched art directors and game directors a bunch of times, but damn, you can really see it in the final product. Speaking of the environment, what is up with the extremely linear exploration in missions, barely there exploration in those so-called bigger areas, terrible exploration puzzles made for toddlers that only serve to slow you down and annoy you, and extremely gaudy looking chests with premium loot box animations when you open them? By the way, before anyone even thinks to mention the hinterlands problem of Inquisition's open world to me, there was no hinterlands problem. You know what the problem was? The hinterlands and many other areas in Inquisition were filled with extremely shitty fetch quests that you felt you had to do because, oh no, if I leave the hinterlands now to continue the main quest, these refugees are probably going to die if I don't finish all the quests related to them. Which, would have made sense since there were such consequences in previous games, like the destruction of Lothering in Dragon Age Origins after you finished one main quest, or how Redcliffe's villagers would be killed by the undead if you chose to abandon the village to its fate. The hinterlands problem wasn't an issue of open world design, it was an issue of bad quest writing and design. The writers couldn't come up with enough interesting quests to add into the area, and so they had to pad it out with many other shitty quests. Meanwhile, so many of the war table operations would have been so cool to get to do yourself, but all you got for those was a little description of what happened. I loved Inquisition's open world-like design. It was really nice to get to explore larger regions of Thedas and really feel more like I was part of that world. And as every single Dragon Age enjoyer who has played Inquisition can tell you, you very quickly learn to ignore the side quests you don't want to do, which leads to you enjoying the game more. But those side quests are still there for you if you decide you do want to do them, or if perhaps in a different playthrough, you want to do them for role-playing reasons. This so-called return to handcrafted missions and levels, as if missions and levels in Inquisition weren't handcrafted, is just a marketing attempt to frame previous games as worse in comparison to Veilguard. But shame on you, EA. You can't fool me. Let's move on to combat. Now, one thing you have to understand about me is that I don't really care that much about combat in an RPG because I'm far more interested in the story, characters, and role-playing elements. Sure, if combat is fun, that adds to the experience, but I'll absolutely play something that has a mediocre combat system and enjoy the hell out of it if the story is good. So with that in mind, I have to say, what exactly is Veilguard's combat trying to be? Please do enlighten me because I can't understand. It's not the Dragon Age party-based real-time with pause combat. It's not Souls-like combat. It's not good ARPG combat. Diablo 4 has, for example, a quite complex combat system with interesting skill trees and abilities. It's not even good God of War combat, since I've heard that comparison mentioned a few times. The skill tree is reminiscent of live service ARPGs like Path of Exile, with tons of useless points separating actually impactful abilities and encouraging grinding out levels. But you're only allowed to use 3 abilities plus an ultimate ability, and companions themselves are essentially another ability on your bar that you can use once every 30 seconds or so. I simply can't understand how this hodgepodge of combat styles was actually approved internally as a good direction for the game's combat. It doesn't do any of the things it's inspired from well. The enemies are just damage sponges that you can just spam your attacks and the same 3 abilities to cut through without actually needing to do any strategic thinking. If you can dodge out of the way of their attacks, you can defeat an enemy that's 15 levels above yours. Remember how in Inquisition, in the hinterlands funnily enough, there was that extremely dangerous level 12 rift at the river that led down towards the wolf cave, and if you were more than a few levels below 12 with regular gear for your level, you would get absolutely one-shot by the demons from that rift even on easy difficulty? Well, in SkillUp's review, he mentions he was able to defeat a boss-type enemy that was level 25 when he was level 10, without any healing abilities on his companions. So this just feels like progression doesn't matter, your abilities don't matter, your companion's abilities don't really matter, plus they do no damage with their regular attacks. Does anything matter in this combat system? Before we move on from combat, I need to mention the terrible UI of the combat wheel. Who designed that, and more importantly, why did they make it like that? Please stop. Take some more classes on UI and UX before you design something like this again. It takes up so much of the screen you can barely see the battlefield behind it. Bringing up that wheel is the only way you can pause the game to my knowledge, and when I pause the game, I like to actually see the enemies I'm fighting. I want to take a look at the situation and decide on what I want to do. But I guess if you're going to kill those enemies no matter what because all you have to do is dodge and spam attacks and abilities, it doesn't really matter that you can't pause to look at the state of the battlefield. We finally reached the part of this video I dreaded the most, the writing. As I mentioned earlier, the writing is the most important part of an RPG for me, and especially a Dragon Age game. In order for me to enjoy an RPG, I have to like the story, the characters, the world building, and especially the role-playing options offered to the player.
The writing is frankly terminal. It lacks any nuance or wit or wisdom. It cannot communicate ideas except to say them aloud to the camera. It manufactures petty, unbelievable tension because it doesn't know how to create anything more real, and it's too scared to ever be truly confronting or dark for fear that it might make the audience uncomfortable. Every interaction between the companions feels like HR is in the room, and every interaction led by the main character, Rook, sounds like he's addressing an under-12 soccer team before a semi-final, or teaching toddlers how to properly share toys.
I can excuse bad visuals, bad combat, bad everything else, as long as the writing is compelling enough for me to put up with the rest. But I don't give a shit if the rest is good, if the writing is bad. I have to mention that I have a very strong interest in writing, also due to the fact that I have a background in creative writing. I have a master's degree in the subject, and have been extremely interested in storytelling for many years. In fact, my interest in storytelling was stoked by Dragon Age Origins, which was the first game I played that had a story and characters that made me feel emotions while going through the story. Until Origins, I had no idea games could be so powerful in the way they help you experience the story. So I have DAO to thank for putting me on the road towards creative writing and storytelling, which makes the bad quality writing of Veilguard sting even more for me personally. I'm not going to go into every single thing wrong with the writing because we'd be here all day and it would also upset me a lot to do that. But here, have some examples. Characters tell you what they are thinking and feeling explicitly, without showing you these things through their actions. It's the opposite of show don't tell, and while until now I thought that rule was an obvious thing that didn't even need to be said to writers, I'm beginning to think the writers at BioWare need to take a refresher course on the basic principles of good writing. There's also that awful thing characters do in bad movies, the as you know trope, where one character explains to another something that they both know, but which the audience doesn't know or may have forgotten. This is especially prevalent in the beginning of the game, where Varric and Harding talk to Rook, and have to re-explain what they're doing even though all three characters are already aware of these things.
You still think you can talk him down before he starts his big ritual?
That ritual is going to tear down the Veil, the only thing separating us from the Fade and an endless number of demons. I have to talk him down.
The explanation is for the benefit of the player, who is thrown into the action without enough preamble. Instead of making a nice prologue to more gradually introduce the player to all of this information, like say playable origin stories for each faction, the player is bombarded with the as you know trope left and right, with a handful of details about Solas and his ritual being repeated about a dozen or so times, not only showcasing bad exposition, but also irrelevant repetition.
Is Solas summoning demons on purpose?
My guess is the Veil is weakening, and they're slipping through the cracks.
And when the Veil comes down completely?
Then the whole world is going to look a lot like this.
The ritual must be weakening the Veil. There are a lot of scared people out here.
And a lot of demons.
If Solas tears down the Veil, doesn't that destroy everything?
The companions speak so much about what exactly you're doing during each mission that it feels like they think Rook is brain damaged and keeps forgetting what it is they're doing. Or worse, suggesting that the writers felt insecure in the quest design and felt they had to fill the silence with comments on the mission from companions, which don't even really express any opinions each companion has, but instead act as exposition or constant reminders of the quest objectives.
Those two statues are the spare key. Line up the symbols.
Dragon Age had this really cool thing called party banter, where companions would start talking amongst themselves about various things, often not about the quest you were on, and showed the player different aspects of their personalities, as well as suggesting how the companions interacted with one another based on their similarities and or differences. But there were also plenty of moments of relative silence during which you could enjoy the exploration, the combat, or hell, even the music. As a little aside, because I'm not giving music a category of its own, it sucks. All the music I've heard so far from the game sounds like Avengers or Mass Effect. Certainly not a fantasy game, and certainly not Dragon Age. I wasn't a fan of Inquisition's soundtrack either, so much so that I actually play the game with music turned off, and for me Dragon Age will always be equal to Inon Zur's music, but at least Morris's soundtrack sounded like fantasy. Don't know how much money BioWare spent on getting Hans Zimmer's studio to make this, but I'm sorry, it's bad. Maybe if they'd spent less money on the music, they could have spent more resources on the actual game. Anyway, back to the writing. Not only do the companions treat Rook as dumb and keep repeating the same few pieces of information about the plot over and over again, but they also speak like they're teenagers or young adults in a Hollywood movie. Real people don't speak like that, and I understand that fiction is obviously not real, characters aren't people, yada yada, but it's extremely hard to take anything that happens in the story of this game seriously when adult characters are not acting like adults. The way companions speak is tonally inappropriate to the things that are happening in the world as part of the external plot. And it's not just the companions who speak in tonally inappropriate ways, it's also Rook and the lack of role-playing options. You can't be mean to companions, you can't dislike them or disagree with them, and you are forced to recruit them all without at least a way to have rivalries or something with them, even if they're also important to the main plot. Here are some examples I've seen in reviews that have made me cringe and genuinely feel queasy with how bad they are. Exhibit 1. Harding's romance scene. I was initially looking forward to having Harding as a romanceable companion because I loved her in Inquisition. After I saw this scene, I never want to hear about her again.
Please listen. You're not alone. Whatever's out there, we'll face it together, I promise. Together.
I could kiss you right now. I'm going to kiss you right now.
At least there's something we might need to. It's your magic.
Rook?
You make the world spin, Lace Harding.
Rook! Lyrium. It's like I'm infused with lyrium.
I noticed it when we touched. That night when we talked about your dreams.
You knew? You knew and you still kissed me?
Wow, I feel drunk.
Yeah, it's because I turned your head into mush.
Or it's love.
You boob! This is not funny! Okay, I'll fix it. I promise. I will find a way and I will fix it. Okay? Okay? Damn it! No, don't touch me!
Exhibit 2. Harding and Emmerich are squabbling because Harding is organizing a camping trip, and Emmerich wants to bring books. I'm sorry, what? Not only that, but your Rook has to talk to them in a nice way, similar to how you talk to toddlers who are fighting. You can't just tell them that this is a stupid thing to argue about, and that we shouldn't be having a camping trip to begin with. Please see for yourself.
Harding, does it really matter if Emmerich brings 8 books?
9, actually.
And Emmerich? So what if Harding is fine sleeping on dirt?
Not all the time.
Exhibit 3. The companions all explicitly mention their personal quests and tell you that you have to solve their quests or else they're too distracted to be able to save the world. Excuse me, we're talking about saving the world from extremely powerful blighted mages who want to blight it and take over. Can we really not put personal shit aside for a moment? Jesus.
I think we've all been distracted.
I've been preoccupied myself after discovering that hand of glory.
And I can't stop worrying about my new magic and what it means.
The Nodists are fallen? What it means for my people?
Until those problems are resolved, we will not be prepared to face the gods.
Our arguments are personal problems. It's as Emmerich says. They hold us back.
We won't stop the gods while other worries weigh us down.
I'm pleased my words provided clarity on how we all felt.
I'm sorry, that's as many examples as I can give you of bad writing. It genuinely makes me feel sick to see such terrible writing masquerading as Dragon Age. Anyway, the final writing related thing I wanted to talk about was that you can't really roleplay your character. The options you're provided in dialogue are honestly not that different from each other. You can't disagree with your companions, you can't call people idiots or genuinely yell at them. Even the so-called direct or aggressive options are extremely mellow, like this example.
Who is this?
This is Governor Evenchi. They have concerns.
On top of all of this, the writers decided to essentially throw everything that happened in the previous games into trash. Even the few choices you have from Inquisition aren't really all that relevant, unless you're Inquisitor Romance Solas, in which case I'm guessing you can get a nicer ending for him in the Inquisitor or something like that. I personally disliked Solas' character in Inquisition and didn't find him all that compelling as a character, but at least was looking forward to taking him down in DA4. Well, that happens in the first 15 minutes of the game. What a waste. I understand that perhaps the Dragon Age Keep had a few too many choices in there to be able to keep track of and actually have at least little nods to them in codex entries or some conversations, but they could have simply removed some of those choices from the Keep. Personally, I think some of those choices shouldn't have been included there to begin with, such as whether you save the Ostagar prisoner or not. They could have kept some of the actually relevant choices that would be related to the characters present in Veilguard, and far more people would have been happy. Let's say from Dragon Age Origins, that you only really care about who the Warden romanced, whether the Dark Ritual was performed, who is a ruler of Ferelden, and what happened to Redcliffe, due to Harding being from there and possibly having a few lines discussing that. From Dragon Age 2, you could say anything related personally to Varric is important, such as how his personal quest with Bartrand and the Red Lyrium was done. From Inquisition, in my opinion, more things should have been relevant, not just what was included in Veilguard, such as who is divine, what happened to the Wardens, who rules Orlais, who drank from the well, etc. These are of course just my initial ideas that I thought about for 5 minutes, but I could have come up with a far more comprehensive list with ideas of how to include nods to these choices in game if I was given a few hours. The writers had years to do this, and they chose not to. The writers at BioWare are trying to pretend that players didn't care about the little nods to choices from previous games in Inquisition, but I was so happy to hear about Grey Warden Bethany in one of those bottles you can find. Extremely sad when talking to Connor if he survived the events of Origins and finding out he was told what really happened and thus became scarred for life because of it, and I could go on. These little nods to previous choices were so nice and made the world feel alive. Now I see Morrigan and realize she's nothing like her character in the previous games, because they stripped her of all her life experiences. Morrigan could literally be any other mage character who can shapeshift, and it wouldn't matter. She's only in the game for so-called fan service, but they couldn't even bother actually including the real character, and not just someone that looks like her and has the same voice actor. I don't even think she will sound the same, in the sense that her speech style will not be honored by the writers, despite having style guides for all the major characters in the game. I know David Gator left, and he was the one who created and wrote Morrigan, but there are style guides. The writers just needed to follow them. In any case, the fact that the previous games are basically completely ignored points to just how much Veilguard disrespects what came before it. I don't know who in the team hated the previous games so much, or why they wanted to distance themselves so much from them, but now they have to know that Dragon Age doesn't even mean anything anymore. They stripped the IP of everything that made it feel like itself, and on top of that, kept shitting on the previous games in interviews, either by mentioning how bad Inquisition's open world design was, it really wasn't, the quest design sucked, or how they have learned so much and improved upon everything and made the best combat in a Dragon Age game, and made the best story in a Dragon Age game. Sure, you keep telling yourself that. Some people are blaming Veilguard's problems on the Mass Effectification of the series, but I'd like to remind you that Mass Effect at least had Paragon and Renegade options, and the Renegade options were genuinely aggressive or mean. Don't really know what Andromeda did with that, since I only played a few hours of the game and then gave up on it, and remember genuinely zero things about it. But Veilguard had plenty of great examples from both the Mass Effect and Dragon Age trilogies on how to do good dialogue, and instead of continuing in that vein, they gave us some bland, extremely sanitized, everyone loves each other and can't disagree bullshit. Sorry, that's not an RPG. And even if this game was touted as an action adventure, the writing would still be bad. Plenty of great examples of stories and characters from those types of games too. Veilguard had no excuses. I am genuinely baffled as to how the veteran writers at BioWare, many of whom have been writing on Dragon Age since Origins, could write such crap. I understand that David Gator left in 2016, and he was the lead writer, but you can't possibly tell me that without him, all of these people suddenly forgot how to write good characters and a good story. The writers Mary Kirby, Cheryl Chee, Lucas Christiansen, and Karen Weeks, who is the lead editor, have been working on Dragon Age since Origins. Trick Weeks had been on the Mass Effect team, but has been writing on Dragon Age since Inquisition. I can't believe that these writers were only good as long as someone else was leading them. You have to have skill, creativity, and a good understanding of how to write in order to be able to write well, even if someone else is the leader. I know that Mary and Lucas were fired from BioWare towards the end of 2023, but by that point, honestly, the writing should have been done, so I imagine we're still seeing their contributions in the final game. And that is simply very strange, because the writing of this game looks like it was made by absolute rookies, or AI, or by writers held at gunpoint by executives and forced to write Avengers-like humor, or what people like to call millennial writing these days. I would love to hear what really happened during the development of Veilguard from any of these BioWare or former BioWare writers. What could have possibly gone so wrong that it made them completely forget basic principles of storytelling? What could have possibly gone so wrong that this writing is what got approved? Please, someone from that team, please speak up. I just can't believe that you'd purposefully write something this bad and let BioWare go on record to say it's some of the best writing they've ever done. It's completely nonsensical. Anyway, sorry for my slight descent into madness towards the end there. I told you, I care about writing a lot, maybe too much. And frankly, this is unacceptable, especially from a big studio from an AAA game corporation, a studio known for its good writing. I promised you I'd talk about the so-called representation and inclusivity in Veilguard. It sucks, and it's basically inclusivity for the sake of having it, for the sake of checking all the required boxes. I'm trans and queer and neurodivergent. I love seeing different parts of my identity represented in movies, shows, books, games, but not like this. I don't want to see a black elf that looks exactly like a basic human black man, but just has pointy ears. I don't want to see an elf of Southeast Asian descent that appeared out of nowhere, directly contradicting the previously established lore in the game's setting, when it would have been so easy to introduce such types of elves through lore-friendly means. I don't want characters in Thedas to refer to themselves as trans or non-binary, because Thedas shouldn't have the same terminology that we do for these gender identities. Was it really so difficult for the writers to come up with some different terms for these that would fit better with the setting? I don't want to have top surgery scars in Dragon Age, where literally 10 years prior in Inquisition, Frem Aclassius, a trans man, was binding and did not even go through some kind of hormone therapy because there weren't really options for that in the world. Also, not every trans man has top surgery. You know that, right? I haven't had it and don't plan on it. Plus, in a world where magic exists, I'd just prefer to have someone magically shape my body instead of getting quite complicated surgeries that take a long time to recover from. Don't get me started on the body sliders allowing you to be obese, but not allowing people to have large butts or breasts. So on one hand, we're being body positive, allowing everyone to look however they want, but if you want to have thick thighs, a big butt, and breasts, that's a no-no. Have you seen how terrible even just slightly chubby characters look like in the different armors and clothes? Dwarves look terrible in everything, due to being short and stocky baseline. Furthermore, while I understand the whole body positivity thing to some extent, it doesn't really make sense that the hero of Veilguard, who is supposed to run, fight, dodge, climb ledges, jump far distances, and so on, can be obese. Don't mention the whole fat and fit thing to me. Most fat people, myself included, are not fit, and would either not be able to do any of those actions Rook can so easily do in Veilguard, or would hurt themselves or be in a lot of pain and exertion if we did somehow manage to do them. I would like to know who, other than people with fat kinks or people who have trauma related to this, would actually want their character to be obese in a fantasy video game. I'm fat, and I have never, ever, ever wanted my character to be as fat as I am. Like, I don't want to be fat in real life, and certainly in a fantasy video game in which I can be whoever I want, I would much rather be a traditionally attractive and fit character. It is absolutely comical and nonsensical to see an obese Rook doing all these feats of athleticism and acrobatics without any issue. I also don't understand how warriors can pull themselves up on ledges while wearing heavy armor, or how mages are able to climb or jump so far in any capacity, or even hold themselves up on a zipline without a harness, since they would certainly not be trained in such things. I hope you understand what I mean with all of my criticisms of the representation and inclusion in Veilguard. I say these things from a progressive perspective as someone who has been severely underrepresented in media, as someone whose basic rights have been constantly debated by society and law. It pains me to have to agree with the fashy, anti-woke crowd on anything, especially on things that should have been positive, such as your protagonist being able to be trans in Veilguard. But not like this. not with modern terminology in a fantasy setting, and not at the expense of existing lore and good writing. These types of representation could have been done in a respectful and nuanced way, such as Parvati's asexuality in the Outer Worlds, to give a more recent RPG as an example. As a conclusion, I have to say I'm extremely disappointed in Veilguard. I have been waiting for this game since 2015 when I played Trespasser. I have a Dragon Age tattoo sleeve that has symbols from each game in the trilogy, and I've been keeping an empty spot on my forearm for a symbol from Dragon Age 4. I guess I'll have to find another symbol from one of the first 3 games to put there instead. I think plenty of people who don't play Dragon Age, more casual fans of Dragon Age, or perhaps people who form unhealthy fake relationships with pixels will enjoy Veilguard. But I know that actual Dragon Age fans who understand the nuances of this game's story and lore will be extremely disappointed and angry about what Veilguard did to the story, world, and characters. You can already see this in some of the negative reviews, the ones that have nothing to do with politics, posted by people who genuinely love Dragon Age and care about the story. To the first group of people, I am glad you can enjoy this game. Please don't feel personally attacked by the negative criticisms towards this game. If you like it, power to you. Honestly, I wish I could enjoy this game too, so I'm happy at least that someone can enjoy it. To the second group of players, I'm sorry. You have my sincere condolences. It is extremely difficult to deal with the existence of Veilguard and what it's done with the Dragon Age IP. I still sometimes can't believe that this is an actual Dragon Age game, and I keep waiting for someone to be like, haha, pranked you, it was just a joke, here's what the actual game is like. I think a lot of us are going to have to essentially grieve Dragon Age. I have never had this happen to me until now, I have never had to grieve a fiction series, but I guess there's a first time for everything. I would ask you to please be respectful in the comments, because as I said, some people will still enjoy this game, and that is absolutely fine if they do. I know that those of us who don't are likely feeling bitter about it, but please don't attack people who like the game just because you're envious that you yourself aren't able to enjoy it. And don't even try to talk about how woke things are bad in my comment section. I will delete those types of comments immediately. That's not what we're about here, and you can take your hateful, fashy perspective somewhere else. Some people asked me whether I was going to play Veilguard and make build guides for this game. The answer is, I don't think so. I'm still considering it because I've heard that there is an interesting portion of the game at the very end that is quite well done, so I am a bit intrigued by that. However, with the visceral, queasy reactions I'm getting even just from seeing a few scenes of dialogue between Rook and the companions, I'm not sure I would be able to suffer through 45 hours of the game just to get to the last 5, even if they are good. At this point, playing the game feels like it would be torture, so it's very likely I will not be doing that to myself, as I don't want to negatively affect my mental health. I am curious, however, if you are an original Dragon Age fan, after seeing these in-depth critical reviews from people like Mr. Maddie, do you plan on playing the game at all? What are your thoughts on the game's quality? Anything from combat, story, exploration, visuals? Let me know down below, respectfully. I know this has been a heavier discussion video than what I usually make, but I really felt like I had to make this so that people know where I stand. If you've stuck around until the end, thank you. No matter my feelings on Veilguard, I will continue to make content about the original Dragon Age trilogy, especially Origins and Inquisition, as well as of course other RPGs and games I enjoy. Be assured that I am not changing the style of my content. I'm not becoming a gaming drama channel. My content will continue to be informational when making guides, and opinion-based with critical analysis when I make discussion videos or reviews. If you're looking forward to more videos about Dragon Age and other games I like, do remember to subscribe, and leave a like and comment while you're at it too. They really help. A special thank you to my members who help keep this channel running. I'd really appreciate it if you consider joining the channel as a member to support me and unlock perks like early access to videos. This has been B Tier Mutineer. Thank you very much for watching, and I'll see you next time.